Hello and welcome to Check 1 2, where we share stories of survivors, advocates and supporters of testicular cancer awareness, all recorded here at the world famous podcast studio Glasgow. In this episode, I'm talking to a man and he swears his story isn't that interesting, but trust me, it's the kind of story that really matters. He's a ScotRail worker, a dad, and also, more importantly, a testicular cancer survivor who's learned just how precious time can be. We talk about the initial diagnosis that really derailed his life and how he found strength when everything fell off track, and what it means to make up for lost time with the people that you love the most. This is raw, it's real, and a reminder that you don't have to be famous or flashy to make an impact, because sometimes it's the quiet stories that hit the hardest. This is David Ross.
Thanks very much for coming on Check 1 2. So it's always good to have guys come on and tell their stories such as well. So I suppose just a kind of little bit off the top then, just a bit about yourself, a bit about your testicular cancer journey, and then we can kind of dive into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, so I'm 38. By the time this goes out, I'll be 39, I would think. I'm married with 2 kids, and I'm originally from Coatbridge, which probably tells you a lot about my life. And so I was diagnosed, I think it was around May 2021 or thereabouts, with testicular cancer, and it was I'd taken up cycling. Mm-hmm. On an exercise bike in the house. I have never ventured out into the actual wild, and it was through that when I was sitting on the bike that I noticed that there was a problem and that there was maybe a lump there. So I, like any standard Scottish man, I ignored it. Not for too long, but I ignored it and thought, that'll be fine. And then it didn't go away, so I I got in touch with the doctor. So I went to see my GP. This was during the height of one of the major lockdowns, so it was actually quite easy to get an appointment with my GP. So I got an appointment with my GP. Then within a week I had an ultrasound, and then another appointment to get the diagnosis, and that was all done in about 2.5 weeks, which is unheard of. Yeah. And it is, I think it's COVID and lockdown was quite fortunate for me in that sense, because it meant I had pretty speedy access to get diagnosed. And so from there I had an operation so I get diagnosed on the Thursday, and by the Tuesday I'd had the operation to remove the testicle and remove the cancerous tumour. Mm-hmm. And then maybe about 4 to 6 weeks after that I started 3 cycles of chemo at the Beatson, which was grim. Yep. Grim beyond belief, and I would not wish that on any other human being in the world. It was terrible. I'm type 1 diabetic as well, so it added to the complications for it. But thankfully, the care at the Beatson was first class, yeah. And I came through the other end. Yeah,
it's always quite a stark thing to happen. Like when you first noticed that lump. Like, so see, when you first noticed it, was there anything that went through your head at first? Did you think, this is going to be something sinister, or were you just like, it's going to be...
I didn't think it was going to be something sinister. My mindset is I'd never go to the worst, mm-hmm. ever. And I'm lucky in the sense of I don't worry about things until I absolutely have to worry, whether it's a job interview or a presentation at work or whatever it is. Until the point where I actually have to worry, then I'm fine. Mm-hmm. I'll just put it to the back of my mind and think, it'll be fine. So there was no great stress. I didn't tell any of my family though what was happening, including my wife, because I thought, the minute you say you've got a lump, everybody worries, and what is the point of giving them extra weeks? If it's something bad, then they're going to have to worry eventually. What's the point in giving them extra weeks of worry where they might not need to? Yeah. So I mean, in hindsight, I don't know if that was the best approach to life, because it came as quite a shock whenever I eventually told my wife and the rest of my family. But I was okay with it until the point where the diagnosis was given, and at that point is when the worry kicks in. But when I was diagnosed, my overriding emotion wasn't worry, and at no point in any of the process did I think I was going to die. At no stage did I worry about death at all. It just wasn't a factor for me.
Yeah.
My first emotion was guilt. Now I'm Catholic, so I carry about guilt anyway, as standard. But this was a whole other level for me, because my mother-in-law had died of cancer just a few years before, and my wife had obviously been involved in caring for her, and then the grieving process after that, and then we'd had children on top of that. So it was a difficult few years, and so I felt guilty at the thought of that burden being put back on my wife again, of me being unwell. And then the burden on my parents, who I think they'd just both turned 60 or thereabouts at that point, so they were at the stage towards retirement. Or my dad was retired, my mum was still working at that point, but I thought of the worry and the stress that was going to add to them. So I wasn't that worried about myself. Obviously I knew that this is going to be a long process, and it's not going to be enjoyable, but the very immediate reaction I had was guilt. Yeah,
which is a reaction that a lot of guys have probably said, and it's guilt for different levels. You know, it's like we've had folk who have felt, like yourself, guilty because they're putting somebody else through something, or we've had some people who have felt a guilt because it was their sexuality that caused them to have cancer and things like that. So guilt does seem to be this kind of overriding sense of that. Yeah. When you kind of kept that to yourself at first, was it difficult not to say to your wife that there was a problem, or was it something that you kind of...
The trickiest thing was just the practicalities of me getting out and getting appointments, because I'm diabetic. We'd been in a full lockdown, and we hadn't been in and out the house or anything. I hadn't had people in the house. I didn't really go anywhere. Paula had went out to work, but I didn't go anywhere. So I missed all the one-way systems in Asda and all that sort of thing. I was oblivious to that. I think that might have been when I went out for my appointments. Potentially might have been one of the first times I'd put a mask on, because I'd been in the house, and so I hadn't done any of that at all. So finding excuses to leave the house. And so I used something about work, going to training for work, and she did ask me a few questions, but I've got a good way with words. So I've managed to get to the appointments without really causing any alarm. So that was the biggest challenge. But I wasn't desperate to say, because, as I say, there's no point worrying about something if I don't need to. So I just don't see the point in burdening other people with that worry. If I can cope with the worry myself, then it's fine. There's no point stressing out other people.
Yeah. And when eventually, you've went for that check, that ultrasound presumably, and then was it at the ultrasound, or was it when they took the testicle away that they confirmed that it was cancer?
So at the ultrasound, it was in Stop Hill in Glasgow, and I could tell instantly from when they were doing the scan. Instantly I could tell there was something wrong based on the facial reaction of the woman who was doing the scan. And she said, I'll just go and ask a doctor to come in. Now, as soon as that happens that something is going wrong. So they didn't confirm the diagnosis, but they as good as told me that it was cancer. And then a consultant phoned me later on in the day. Again, didn't quite confirm it, but said we'll need to get you in, we'll need to do blood tests, and we'll need to remove the testicle. So that was, and then they did the biopsy on it, and officially I think confirmed a few weeks later. But it's one of the frustrations that you don't really get a formal diagnosis straight away, because they can't. And you can tell everybody's trying to be careful with their words to make sure that nobody's specifically saying to you, this is you are diagnosed with cancer, in case it's not, and then there's maybe legal repercussions or whatever. I don't know if that's what's in their heads at the time. But yeah, instantly when I was getting the ultrasound done, I knew it was wrong, because the facial reaction was not. She didn't have a good poker face, I would say. Because in fairness, she was very good, and she came. She could see I was upset afterwards in the lobby of the hospital, and she came down and spoke to me and helped me. But yeah, she maybe needs to work on the poker face.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those ones. I unlike you, I didn't look at the face of the person doing the ultrasound, and I thought, oh, I'm just going back to see the doctor. I didn't put two and two together.
The doctor came in to the room,
right.
I think, actually, and again, he didn't say too much, but danced around it enough. But yeah. And
at this point, when you've been told that, did you go home and say to like your wife Paula at that point?
Yeah. So what I did was I asked my sister. I phoned my sister-in-law. My wife's sister. It was my first phone call when I came out, on the basis that she lived not far from us, and I wanted her to go to the house so that she could look after her daughters, who at the time were just 3 and 1. Right. So she could look after the daughters, and then asked if she could send my wife out to the car, and then we went for a drive, and I told her then. Right.
It's because it's a difficult thing to say, like, you know, because even though you didn't know that it was cancer, the likelihood is that it was going to be.
Yes.
And to be able to have to say that to somebody, it's quite a harrowing thing. What was your what was your first unfiltered thoughts of that point when you're like, yeah, this is cancer? Like, what was your thoughts at that point?
There was an unreality to it. I remember sitting in the lobby at Stop Hill, and I was just thinking, this can't be right. This, like, I don't get cancer. Mm-hmm. That's not a thing that happens to me. Even though we'd had the experience with my mother-in-law and other family members, but there was just a sense of this can't be happening. And then, so then when I phoned my sister-in-law, I was crying, so she couldn't understand the word I was saying at first, and then had to tell her. And then when I was telling, when my wife came out to the car, and I was trying to tell her, but you're right, the actual sentence, I have cancer, it took me a while to get that out, because so I was crying, and she was then getting even more worried and anxious, thinking, right, what's going on here, because she didn't know. Mm-hmm. So if she'd known I'd been for tests, then she would have put 2 and 2 together. But because she had no idea what was going on, she was thinking, she'll have been thinking all manner of horrendous things. And then eventually I sort of staggered out that I had cancer. Mm-hmm. And it was a shock, obviously, to her. So as I say, in hindsight, I don't know what I would have done in hindsight, because would I have given her the time to prepare for that? But it would have been horrendous stress for her over that time. But was the shock of it all even worse? Mm. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there is no perfect way of doing that, I suppose.
Definitely isn't. There's no way that you can know how anybody would react anyway, but let alone yourself as well. Do you know what I mean? And again, you're right. Like, I suppose if you look at statistically, you know, testicular cancer, you know, you could have sat there and went, yeah, like, statistically this probably isn't that, you know. However, obviously it didn't work out that way, and given that they'd obviously, like, your in-laws, and like, obviously that impacts your immediate family as well, but having dealt with a cancer diagnosis, and was it you lost your wife's mother, you know, how did your cancer diagnosis land and impact your family around you?
So after I told my wife, we drove to my parents' house, and we told them, and again, it was a bolt out of the blue for them. My uncle, my mum's sister, had cancer at the same time. He was in the final stages of his life with cancer as well. So I think that was just a kind of another thing happening for my parents. And I told my brother, he's a neuroscientist, right. So his brain works in a certain way, so he immediately went on the computer, googled everything, found statistics, facts and figures, life expectancy and all that sort of stuff, and that was his way of coping with it. The focus for me and my wife was on our girls, and what do we do for them, and we did nothing for them, in the sense of they were far too young. We didn't tell them there was anything going on, and maybe when we talk to chemo, we can talk about what I did to try and hide it from my children. But But the process of going round and telling everybody that day was exhausting, because I had to tell my family, then we went to tell my wife's father and the rest of her family, then I have to tell people in work, so that my team, then I'd tell my boss and whatnot, and you're having the same conversation maybe 10 times over the course of a few hours, and I, by the end of the day I was absolutely exhausted, and I fell asleep. I'm a good sleeper in the sense of I fall asleep straight away anyway, because I'm just too tired not to.
Yeah.
I don't lie awake at night worrying about whatever could happen to me or anything, or reviewing the day or anything like that. I'm far too simple a person to do that. But I fell asleep as normal straight away that night, and I remember the next day my wife saying that my brother was texting her. They were both obviously Googling away and all that stuff, and laughing about the fact that I'd fallen asleep instantly. I wasn't up all night. But the main focus for me was my wife and my children. My children I was less concerned about, because they would be oblivious. There'd be lots going on of people extra help being needed for babysitters and that type of thing. My main concern was my wife and what she was going to have to, what she was emotionally going to have to go through, but then also physically having to help me for months, and putting that extra burden on her was the thing that I was concerned about more than anything else.
Don't you find as well, it's that, see, when you get that diagnosis and things, it's like the stats and all that, they're really helpful in terms of like what you know is going forward. But I think, like, for me, when I grew up, I only knew one guy who had cancer.
Yep.
And he had leukemia when we were kids, and he died. And I don't know, did you ever have this thought of what you had, your image of cancer and chemotherapy and all that, and what it done to you, compared to what you actually went through? Was it any different, or?
So I didn't think too much about what was coming. I realise I'm painting a picture of myself here of not an awful lot of thought about anything here, but I didn't, and this was a mistake I made. I didn't read up on chemotherapy or anything like that. I didn't, and they gave you fact sheets and guidance and all that of here's what could happen to you. I never really read it, because I thought, again, what's the point? Whatever's going to happen to me with chemo is going to happen to me. There's no point in me reading up to worry about it. In hindsight, I should have done a bit of reading to prepare myself, because it was so horrendous, the chemo, that I was not mentally prepared for how bad it was, and then it resulted in anxiety, and my slightly relaxed approach to life temporarily veered off on another path. But you're right, if I think of cancer, I thought it was something that killed people, and our immediate experience in our family was that my mother-in-law had died from it. So, and similar to you, people, somebody in school had died from cancer when they were a teenager. So, I don't think anybody has a positive sort of redemptive story. When your immediate thought about cancer, it's a pretty negative thing. But as I say, there was no, oh, I'm doomed, this is it, like, let's get the will drawn up sort of thing. I didn't have that at all. Now, I think part of that is I'm quite religious, and so I just had faith that this would be fine. Now, the logical part of my brain should maybe have kicked in and suggested, well, this might not be fine, but at no point in any of the process did I think that I was going to die, and a large part of that was my faith, but also I generally have an optimistic approach to life, where I work on the basis that everything will be fine in the end, and if it's not fine, we'll deal with that at the time. But so I'm quite fortunate in that sense. As I say, during the chemo, I became very anxious. It required I required medication to manage the anxiety, but that was more the physical aspects of the chemo rather than any concern about the ultimate outcome of it.
Yeah, it was more what was happening to you physically at that point in time. And obviously, like, going back to the kids, you know, how did having that cancer diagnosis, and if it didn't, but how did it change how you saw your role as a dad within your cancer journey as well?
So the immediate diagnosis, it didn't change it, but after the chemo there was a big change because I'd been so I had 3 cycles of chemo, which were three weekly cycles. Now normally the treatment that I received, I should have been in the hospital maybe on the Friday, out on the Monday, and then in another 2 or 3 weeks time back in for the same, and then again with various bits of treatment in between. But because I'm diabetic and I reacted quite badly to the treatment, my first stay in hospital was about 3 weeks, and I was in and out. I came home, I got home one night and I was back in the Royal for within about 2 hours or something.
Yeah.
I think I was coughing up blood, or I was whatever it was. So I was for about 2 to 3 months. I was basically away in the hospital or upstairs and bedbound, and so there wasn't an awful lot I could do with my children. And so particularly my wee one, who Sophie, who was 1 at the time. Before I had the cancer, I was the one who put her to bed most nights. We had a great relationship, played with her all the time, got her ready, all that sort of stuff. Because I spent so long in the chemo and then the recovery from chemo, I was unable to do all of those things. It took ages to rebuild my relationship with her.
Right.
She'd become so used to my wife being more or less the sole carer for her that simple things like me getting her ready, if my wife was in, she would reject me and go straight to my wife, wouldn't let me take her to bed and all that sort of thing. That significantly changed. That took a long time to rebuild. I would say that almost a year or so of no longer feeling like she was rejecting me because she wasn't used to me, or because she'd just grown much more comfortable with my wife. I mean, we're 5 years on and still prefers my wife to me, but I don't think it's anything to do with the fact that I wasn't there. And my older daughter, Emily, who was 3 at the time, she's always been quite an anxious, worried person. She's kind of captain safety in her house of follow the rules and you don't do that because it's unsafe and that sort of, but she worries about things. And she saw me getting taken away in an ambulance at least once, maybe twice, and there was definitely an element of that was playing in her mind lots and lots. It delayed her going to nursery because we were worried about her catching, so she was due to start nursery in the summer. We delayed it till the autumn because we were worried about her catching COVID and then bringing it home. So she missed out on opportunities, but the worry that imposed on her, even though she doesn't actually know what was happening, but she knew there was something. She knew there was something going on, but that was a challenge for doing that to a 3-year-old. Wee Sophie, I wasn't worried about what it was doing to her mentally. I was just the breach in the relationship that we built up because we'd been besties when she was before the cancer, and it took so long. But I knew that would come back. With Emily, it was the worry to someone who's already quite stressed and worried as it is.
And I think that's why it's almost helpful to have conversations like this and have guys like you tell that your own experience within that, because that's a hard thing, and it's one of the unspoken things that, you know, people, I don't know if you experienced this, I certainly did. It's like you go through your cancer and then see if you start looking normal, that's you better, you know, but actually it's like even if you got better, you're back at work and had your hair, you still had that ongoing thing with the wee one that you know that, and it impacts relationships, and it doesn't matter if they're 1 or 101. You know, there's still going to be that impact. And obviously kids are so resilient that, you know, she just moved on and the way of like, oh, it's mum putting me to bed, mum's doing that, and that's kind of what happens. But the fact that cancer did that, you know, it's such a horrible thing. And my son was 5, he was 4 when I got diagnosed, and I remember coming out of surgery and they came up and I must have been white as a sheet, obviously, and I remember him saying to my wife, you know, like, oh, Dad looks scared, but it's because I was so white, you know, and that maybe didn't, you know, impact him as such, but it's always going to play in their mind, you know, and I think there was a lot of that as well.
The hair thing was a particular moment for us. So I was losing my hair, and I don't know if you were the same. I was lying down, waking up in the morning, there was clumps of it coming out in the shower. So it was just thinning and thinning and thinning. And so we decided one day the girls were out, my mum and dad were looking after them, and I was at home. I think this was after the first cycle. And we decided that we'll just shave my head because I looked ridiculous. And so shaved my head, and that was a grim process because we both cried during that, because there was something symbolic of losing my hair. That was like, all right, this is real cancer. The losing of the hair, that's kind of what you think of quite often with people who've got cancer. So that was quite traumatic. And then when the girls came back home and they stood at the front door and they saw that I was bald, and there was a look on both of them, but particularly Emily, the older one, of not quite fear, but a kind of oh no, that's not you. Mm-hmm. You're a different person. And even now, so they were going through photos on my phone, and I did some fundraising the year after, once I was better, and put some photos of me during chemo up on online, and the girls were flicking through the folder on my phone that had those, and they find it very difficult to look at. Now, they don't know why. They think that, why did mummy shave your head, sort of thing, so it's her fault that she turned me bald. But the amount of times that they still talk about how they didn't like that I was bald, and they didn't like my hair at the time, and that sort of thing. They didn't like how I looked. And I definitely still feel for my older one, Emily, so she's 7 now, there's something that she knows that wasn't right. When she looks at those photos, she knows there's something wasn't right. She's never quite, whether she doesn't want to or she's just not twigged, she's never made the link between, hold on a minute, you look like that because you were unwell. But there's still an impact. Even still 4 years on, there's still a bit of an impact when they look at the photos of me. Yeah.
And does that impact still have that effect on you? Obviously, what's seeing their impact of your cancer on your children, that must be quite heavy for you.
So the thing that I'm dreading is at some point they will realise what had happened to me, and we'll have to have that conversation. My hope is that because they can see I'm fine now, and the distance of many, many years, that they'll be okay about it. But if I got to 15 or 20, whatever, and suddenly one of my parents told me that they had cancer when I was a child, I don't know what it would have. I might have been, perhaps a bit of a pest, but I'm glad you're fine. Or is it going to have an emotional impact on them? I don't know, but I'm not looking forward to that point, albeit the fact I'm still alive and I'm absolutely fine is hopefully confirmation to them that when you go through bad things in life, you can come out the other end. It's not always going to have a bad ending. But the kind of the burden of the worry or the pressure or that image of Emily looking out the window as I'm getting taken away in an ambulance is a difficult one.
And see that then aligning then with your faith and these things type of thing, as a family, do you go to do you go to chapel and all that together?
So me and the girls go to chapel. Paul is not Catholic. So we hadn't been because it was COVID. So we'd stopped in the lockdown of March 2020, whatever it was, and it was then because of the cancer, it was well into the autumn of 2021 before we went. But that when I was getting the chemo, I had difficulty sleeping. When I was in the beats, and then also when I was at home. And the two things that helped me sleep was a sleeping tablet. For the first time in my life, I'd had something like that. But I prayed the rosary every single night. So I took my sleeping tablet. That gave me about a 15-minute window before I was gone for about 6 hours solid or so. And I prayed the rosary in between. Right. And it was it became something that it was my routine, and I clung to it because particularly after during the chemo, but for a period after it, the thing in my day I looked forward to most was getting that sleeping tablet, because I knew for the next 6 hours I I would be asleep and I wouldn't have the pains and the anxiety and the struggles and needing help to get out of bed and not being able to do anything for myself. So that sleeping tablet and the rosary was the best part of my day, the best 15 minutes, because I knew that was the day coming to an end.
Right.
And it wasn't in any sense of I don't want to be alive anymore or any depressed or suicidal thoughts. It was, this guarantees that I'll be resting and maybe tomorrow will be better.
Yeah.
And that I spent a good part of a day looking forward to getting to bed, because I knew the sleeping tablet would guarantee me sleep, in the hope that tomorrow's got to be better than today, because today's been miserable, tomorrow's going to be better. And it took a while for the tomorrows to get better, but the faith element of it made a difference to me.
And did you feel that your faith got stronger because you had that? Yeah.
Yes, and it wasn't. So I wrote a blog during my first cycle of chemo when I was in hospital, and what I wrote originally, and it was, I've not had any great movement in my faith. Hasn't got stronger, but it hasn't got weaker. It's stayed the same, and I never published it because ultimately, having spoken to my wife and my family, I thought I'm not quite sure I'll be able to emotionally handle the response to it, because lots of people, because it had been locked down, I hadn't seen loads of people, so people didn't necessarily know that I was unwell, in the sense of I didn't post on Facebook, hey guys, I've now got cancer, or because I'm not bumping into people in the office, so they maybe didn't notice that I wasn't, with the exception of the people who I specifically told. People won't have noticed that I wasn't about, because everybody was in their house still at that point. But when towards the, I think it was actually a year later when I started to do some charity fundraising, I dug the blog out again, and I left it as it is. I published it as it was, but I wrote an extra bit at the top to say a couple of things that have changed here. The first one was my relationship with Sophie, and how she'd get so used to me not being around, but the other bit was my faith, and how it was it had got much stronger, because it was along with particularly the support, emotional and physical support from my wife, it was the faith that got me through that, because I just at no point did I think that God would let me die, because why would he take me away from my wife, and why would he take me away from a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old? Now, I accept there will be people who will watch this and think, but terrible things happen in the world, and children get taken away from parents, and parents get taken away from children, and I accept that entirely. But for me in that moment, at no point did I think that God was going to let that happen to me. Now, why, I am not in any way unique or special, but I just that's not going to happen to me. Yeah. And the prayer element of it, it became a crutch for, I wanted to, I believed it, but it became a crutch for me as well. That was part of my routine: sleeping tablet, rosary, peace. Yeah.
Which is quite an incredible thing. It's quite profound of an impact to have on you as well. Yeah. Like, and I understand what you're saying. There is going to be, but it's all, there is that objective view of how what you were saying there, but subjectively for you couldn't think of anything other than, well, this is how, and that's probably where your faith, kicked in terms of like, and how you were spoken to as such. It's like, this is what I believe because this is what I'm receiving as such. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Which is, and I'm always interested, I think, because like I've never claimed to be religious. So I've read my Bible. I've done all these things like during like my Boys Brigade days, and but I've never had a grounding in faith. But I'm always interested when people do, especially in dark times like cancer, because it does always appear to be that it's such a, I suppose crutch isn't the right word I'm looking for, but like just to kind of mirror what you're saying, like to have that crutch there, not just for you, but like for your family as well. It's that spiritual side of it is very unique and quite a powerful message for people as well.
I think particularly for my parents and my family, in the sense of I dread to think how many candles were lit for me. Coatbridge churches were probably close to burning point at some point because of the number of candles. But it will have been, and it was a massive support, particularly for my parents. But yes, as I say, I knew that God was not going to let me die from cancer, or that's what I thought. But then, why did God let me get cancer in the first place? And I have no answer to that. I accepted that it's entirely, there's a lack of logic to that, and my brother, who is a very logical man, can't quite understand the thought process that I go through for that. But that helped me get through, and it wasn't a sudden conversion, because we were raised Catholic. We went to mass, and I've always gone to mass, and always believed in God. But it was particularly strong during that time when I needed it.
And I think that's really admirable, and it's great that there is that out there for people as well. Do you know what I mean? Especially like, you probably find that a lot of people maybe do turn to religion as well when something bad happens as well. But the fact that you already were established in that and had that, to kind of go back then through your kind of chemotherapy journey, obviously, like being a type 1 diabetic, like the complications that come with type 1 diabetes, can you talk a little bit about what that kind of potentially was, and actually what happened for you with that?
So it caused havoc with my blood sugars. They were all over the place, particularly very high blood sugars, which can have long-term complications. So if you have poor glucose control, and particularly very high blood sugars over a long period of time, then it can affect your eyesight, your neuropathy, so kind of feeling on my fingers and my toes, various organs, their capacity is determined by my blood sugar control over a long period of time. The two things were the blood sugars being all over the place, but I was very, very sick. I vomited constantly with the chemo, and so I was unable to eat, which for a diabetic is quite important, and being able to match any sort of insulin with what I was eating. So I would be taking wee bites, and then I'd be thrown up, and I was doing that repeatedly, and terrible heartburn, not just a kind of, I'll take a wee Rennies and it'll be fine. It burned and it was sore, and so, but I was dehydrated. I was completely knocked out, not knocked out in the sense of under anaesthetic, but I mean I was drained and done in completely. My wife took a photo from one of the times when she came to visit me, and I didn't even know she was there, because I was out of the game. And she took a picture of a kind of selfie of her just sitting there on her own for an hour. So that it absolutely floored me completely. And how naive I was. I took 2 books in with me and a laptop, expecting, I think it was the Euros that was delayed from 2020 to 2021. From memory, I think it was England and Italy in the final. And I took my laptop in thinking, that's been quite good. I'll get to watch much more football in here than I will at home. And I didn't see anything for that first cycle. Nothing. I felt awful. And any time any food came near me, just the thought of food made me sick. So I lost loads of weight at the time. But slowly but surely, the actual chemo itself, as I say, it was supposed to be 3 days. Because I'm diabetic, it was extended to 5 days. But I was in the hospital for at least 2 weeks or so. So slowly but surely, I started to not feel as sick, and I was able to eat. Now, the sick, nauseous feeling lasted for months, well after the chemo. Every morning when I woke up, I thought I felt sick every morning for months and months on end, well past the point of chemo, and I was sore as well, stiff and sore. And you'll see when I stand up at the end of this interview, I'm like a man twice my age trying to get up. But the most immediate was the vomiting and the heartburn and the high blood sugars, and that just sent everything haywire completely. And it was grim.
It's obviously I had went through the same kind of chemo, and I think everybody's got their kind of burdens on that. But thankfully, I didn't have any anything else going on at that time. So to, again, like when we're able to talk about stuff and like being type 1 diabetic and the ins and outs that it has of that, I suppose looking back at your treatment, what are the things that have kind of stuck? Obviously, you said that nauseated feeling stuck with you for a long, long time. Do you still have peripheral neuropathy and things like that? Do you have any tinnitus?
I do in my legs.
Right.
Particularly, I actually went and got I got scans maybe about 6 months ago because I was finding it was in my job we went up to Aberdeen and we did a staff Q&A, so I was at the front of the room standing for about an hour as part of a team answering questions. And I thought at one point, I'll have to sit down and my legs are just going to give way. I felt as if I was losing feeling in my legs, and I didn't know if that was a chemo thing or a diabetes thing,
right,
because the diabetes can impact the neuropathy as well as the chemo. And so I went and got them scanned in it. So that's 3.5, 4 years on of still having complications as a result of it. And thankfully, what they said is it was damage caused by the chemo, but it's not something that's getting worse. So ultimately, I'm okay with that because it's not a progressive diabetic thing. It was the chemo's done damage. There's nothing you can do to reverse it, but it's not likely to get worse. The chemo has still, well, I'm laying the blame at the door of chemo. My body is very stiff. I feel like my father, who's 66, getting up and down from chairs, and when I wake up in the morning, it takes a bit of time for my body to get moving again. That's better than it was, but for a while, a long time after the chemo, I would have to be holding on to things to get up and to get out of the bed and that sort of thing. So there were longer lasting consequences for me, whether that was because I was diabetic and it had just a greater impact on my body overall, or that was just the norm for chemo. I don't know. But yeah, the chemo has done irreparable damage to my body, which I'm okay with. That's just the way it is, and it's much better that I'm alive with a slightly older frame. But yeah, there are long-lasting effects, and I think you'd mentioned it earlier. People think you've had the chemo, therefore that's you're done, and you're not. Both physically and emotionally, there is a long road to recovery.
Yeah, and speaking on that emotional part, you obviously touched on that earlier on, where you said you were quite kind of positive mindset, and then anxiety kind of came off and took you away. I was kind of the same. I can, my wife always laughs at me because I never really experienced real anxiety until I was in my 30s.
Yep.
And because of my chemo, what was that like then? What was that like, suddenly experiencing that, and what's happened to your outlook since, and what was that anxiety like for you?
So I remember it very specifically when it first happened, because like you, I'd never had anxiety, I'd never had a panic attack. I didn't know what that felt like, and I have to be honest, I used to be of the mindset of, well, just don't think about it and you'll be fine. And I see lots of Instagram videos just now of funny videos of wives saying, here's my husband's reaction to my anxiety, and it's a husband just saying, you just don't think about it, don't worry about it and you'll be fine. That was the way I thought, because I hadn't experienced it myself. But it was the third night of the 5-night cycle for the chemo, and the doctors had told me that the first 2 nights would be a lower dose, and the third night is when the higher dose would kick in, so it would be worse. So I was already thinking, all right, this is going to be a tough one. And then I don't know if you were the same when you were getting your chemo, they brought the bag in and it was black, because I think it was to do with the light shining in from the window, and it was just this big black bag of doom. And the moment, and my wife was sitting next to me at the time when they brought it in, that was the 1 hour a day she was allowed to visit because of the COVID. So she was given one slot, and she was the only person who was allowed to visit for the duration as well. But they brought the black bag in, and I suddenly just felt this wave come across me. It started in my head and came across my whole body of anxiety, and I didn't know what it was, and she told me later on that I was clearly having an anxiety attack. And then the second time I really remember it So I had that, and then I didn't need any. I think I was the kind of physical impact kicked in, and the anxiety moved on, and that was fine. It was when I then eventually got home, and I remember my wife was working, and my brother had come over to essentially babysit me, and I was lying on the couch, but then even though physically I needed to lie on the couch because I couldn't do anything, I was getting myself up and down and up and down, and I couldn't sit still, and it wasn't just I'm a wee bit agitated. I literally couldn't sit still. I had to get up, move. I started hoovering, which I was in no way physically capable of hoovering, but I just had to be doing things. And then eventually I phoned my wife, and I was crying, and asking her, like, I was like the way that my daughters are just now. If my wife is late home from work, it's as if it's a travesty, and they phone in tears, begging her to come home. I phoned her in crying, and I told her she needed to come home because I couldn't deal with whatever it was that was happening to me, and so then I phoned the doctor and got some medication for it. And I mean, my wife laughs at me because the dose was so low. I think because particularly at the time I was so scrawny, but that helped me significantly. I can't remember what it was called. Diazepam is what it was called, I think. And that helped me. I mean, I could not be responsible for operating heavy machinery or looking after my children or driving or anything, because I was staggering about. Between that, waking up and the effects of the sleeping tablet easing off, and then going into the diazepam meant that I was spaced out for quite a long time, but it helped deal with the anxiety, and slowly but surely over time I stopped requiring medication, and I've never had it since, and I've been back to the way I was. But it was a horrible feeling, but it did give me an insight into people who do experience genuine anxiety, and that there is nothing in that moment, at the very least, there's nothing you can do about it. If you feel a wave of anxiety coming across you, it's coming. And so you can maybe deal with some of the root causes later and try and figure out what is it that's causing that, and is there anything you can do to change, to address it. But in that moment, there was nothing I could do about it whatsoever, and it was such a strange, unusual feeling for me, because, as I say, I used to be a lie down, put my head down and go to sleep, not a care in the world. So it was difficult, and I was also, I wasn't great with looking after my children. After the chemo, and I'd got a bit better, but I was still quite agitated, and if they weren't doing as they were told straight away, then I would be shouting and bawling at them, and that took a while to ease off. And it was really only once I was physically better did the agitation and all that properly go away. Everything for me on the anxiety and the mental health was linked to the physical. Yeah,
and I think that's, again, it's one of the big things that isn't spoken about, that we do try to on this podcast as well, because it's something that I felt, it's you've had this massive operation, you've had poison pumped into your veins to kill something that was killing you, you know what I mean? So, and then, but it's the mental aspect of that, and having to deal with that. And I think, there's a lot to be said for that, because I was the same, it's like very much of a, because I've got tinnitus anyway, it got worse because of my chemo, and at like a certain time at night it'd be really ramped up, and my kids would just be playing, and I'd be like, guys, go and just be quiet, and they're only kids playing, but and you kind of go, oh wait a minute, there's something not quite right here.
And I was conscious of the fact that I'd been away for so long, and then when I was back, I wasn't really back, and then even when I was getting better, I was still not back to playing with them the way I was, and so shouting at them if I've been too noisy, and then feeling guilty for shouting at them because they've hardly seen me, and then feeling guilty that my wife was still having to work and look after the girls and look after me and do all the housework and all of that, and it was only, as I say, the physical bit for me was the key to only once that sorted itself out and I was able to contribute again, then I felt mentally back to normal.
Yeah, I think we talk about like obviously the longer lasting effects of chemo and how these can kind of dissipate. Do you feel, even though you have felt mentally better, do you still feel that impact of having your cancer diagnosis, going through chemotherapy, has had a longer lasting impact on your mental health than maybe you kind of maybe thought it would have?
I don't know. I don't walk about thinking about cancer and having had it. I think when I do things like this, and I've done a bit of charity work with the Beats and that sort of thing, it makes me think about it and what I experienced. The thing that about a year or a year and a half after I'd had the treatment, I did a charity cycle. So I did a cycle. I started off cycling 10 kilometres a day, every day for the month of August, and asking people to donate. And then, stupidly, I thought, 10 kilometres isn't very much. So I would cycle, if it was the 12th of August, I'd cycle 12 kilometres, 13. So by the 31st of August, I was cycling 31 kilometres a day, which was, I would never ever do that again, because I'm not built to do that. But when I started to put stuff up online about that, people who either hadn't known I had cancer, because I didn't tell, I told the people that needed to know, but I didn't do a big announcement, and they hadn't seen the physical impact, so I put some pictures up of how I looked. So that kind of felt like having to go back through it all again, because the amount of people who got in touch to say, I didn't know anything about it, or oh my goodness, look how bad or unwell you looked, and that type of thing. So there was a stage during that where it felt kind of reliving the emotions of it, but on a day-to-day basis just now, I don't at all. I don't think about it often. So I'm preparing for things like this, then I go back through how it was and what I experienced.
And do you think it's changed you in any way, having that experience? Because all experiences do something to us. Do you think it's changed you in any way?
I think it's confirmed or reaffirmed my general outlook on life, which is positive. No need to worry about things until you need to worry about things, and that God willing, it'll all be right in the end. Now that again is contradicted by, for example, the experience with my mother-in-law, where sadly she died, but it's on my own of what happened to me. It's a message of a cancer diagnosis. It doesn't have to be the end.
Yep.
And so it's confirmed to me that I'm right to be positive about life.
Mm-hmm. And if you could go back and tell yourself one thing before you went on your cancer journey, like if there was one thing you knew before it started, what would it be? What do you wish you had known?
That's a good question. Probably just how horrendous chemotherapy was going to be, and I think I don't know whether I should admit this. At first, they weren't sure if I was going to need chemo, so they did the operation and then said, not sure if you're going to need chemo. And then they said, you need one cycle, just as a kind of precaution. And I thought, right, that's fine. I actually thought at the time, if I didn't have chemo, then it wouldn't really be, that'd be kind of fake cancer.
Right.
That wouldn't really count. I'd be embarrassed telling people I had cancer and I just had an operation, which is a ludicrous position, but that was what was in my head at the time. And so then, just before the first cycle was due to start, they phoned me and said, actually, it's a wee bit worse than we thought. You're going to need 3 cycles. And that was a bad moment. But I wish I'd known quite how horrendous the chemo was going to be. Mm-hmm. I'd very naively thought, this will be fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll get not well, I might lose my hair. If I lose my hair, who cares? It'll grow back in and it'll be fine. And ultimately, it was fine in the end, but the process of getting there was horrendous, and I was not in any way prepared for that. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe that contradicts my slight, don't worry until you worry, but I probably should have read up a wee bit more into the effects of chemo, particularly for people with diabetes, because I was not in any way prepared for the grimness of that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think there's sometimes where it's better not to know. I know that I made the mistake of the night before my surgery seeing how they perform at orchidectomy. And it was
Why would you do that
it was the
yourself?
most ridiculous thing I ever done, and that was one of the first times I experienced a panic attack. Was that night I was curled in the fetal position, going, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." But at the same time, you know, like when and that I shouldn't have seen. But yeah, like if you've got a pre-existing condition as well, like to go, right, okay, how's this going to affect X, Y, and Z? I suppose as well, it's like, I remember when we first met, you came at the Cahonas offices and we were talking about your cancer, and we talked about this specifically, and you were a bit kind of hesitant because you thought that your story wouldn't be interesting enough.
Yes.
Or having laid it out in this setting, like, do you think that your story is interesting?
I mean, interesting is probably a stretch, but because when I've seen Alan Stubbs and those types of people who've had it, and you think, right, that's a famous person has had a cancer story to tell. People will be interested in that, and I thought, why would anybody be remotely interested in mine? But the more I thought about it, the more I realised, if there's just one person who's in a similar situation, similar background to me, 34, 35-year-old guy with young kids, who's going through something similar, and there's something in my story that makes him think, oh, thank goodness for that, I'm the same, and that's all right. So I was talking about that with my wife earlier, actually, is worth it. So if only one person watches it, and only that one person gets something out of it, then it's what I've not lost anything from doing it. I'm still sceptical that anybody will find my life interesting, but it could resonate with somebody who's going through a similar situation.
But I think you're dead on there. I think that, you know, this is what the whole podcast is about. If it helps one person, you know, and I, even when I do my talks, my educational talks, I say that at the end, especially at high school kids. I went, listen, see if just one of you goes home and does a check. I've done my job and I've done it to the best of my ability, and that's great. I think your story is interesting. Like, genuinely, like, I think like that anybody's journey within that, and especially, you know, having a different kind of comorbidities and things like that as well that you had, obviously with your type 1 diabetes. I think it is interesting because, like you say, if there's one guy in the position who's like, oh, type 1 diabetes and chemo, oh, what do I do? Now, they might not have testicular cancer, but if, you know, in the SEO world of YouTube and Spotify, they happen upon your podcast and they listen to, you know, like how you went through it, you know, what your journey through chemo was like, it will help better prepare them for that. And I think that's a massive thing. You know, it's like, and one of the reasons that we kind of started the podcast was, again, like, and me wanting to host it, because I was never a born host as such. You know, I just wanted to kind of do my talks, and but when the podcast came up, if me and my wife had heard the end of our story at the start, we would have navigated it very differently. And I think that's what you being here today allows. You know, it doesn't help past David, but past David is helping future somebody else. And I think that's a beautiful message to kind of have. To anybody, it's at the start of their journey, is there anything that you would say to them, be it around treatment, be it around faith, be it around just your own personal outlook on life? What advice would you give to somebody?
How you feel about your process is how you feel, and that's okay. So just because you feel down about it or you feel up about it, you're happy or you're sad or you're neutral about your situation, that's how you feel, and that's okay. You don't have to feel a certain way. You don't have to think, well, I've watched something with other people and they felt that way, so therefore why am I not feeling that? Your own process and experience is unique to you, so don't get worried about how you're feeling, because that's just how you're feeling, and you have to manage it from there. But don't try and force yourself to feel a certain way, or get really stressed because you're stressed, or get really stressed that you're not stressed, because I know there's people who think, why am I not worried, and then get worried about not being worried. So feel how you're feeling and deal with that accordingly. And the other thing, I suppose it's easy for me to say because I'm here, that there are, particularly, well, for testicular cancer, the survival rate is high, and try and keep that in your mind as you go through the lows of chemo and the misery of it, that there is a very high chance of coming out at the other end. Because sometimes it can be very, very grim, and you can get low, but ultimately it's the outcome that's the most important, and there is a high survival rate for testicular cancer. So try, if you can, to put yourself in the big majority group of us who do survive, and not the minority who unfortunately don't make it.
Yeah, right. No, thanks very much, and thanks for coming on and taking the time out of your day to come on Check 1 2. It's I thoroughly enjoy this part of it, because I learn so much more about it's like, even like obviously reading your stuff that you'd done in newspapers and things like that, to be able to read your story, and it takes me back a bit, and I come back to things I never thought about until now. So I always appreciate that. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Cheers.